On Christmas Eve, Pope Benedict XVI, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, passed away. This was the passing of an intellectual giant. And to join us now to reflect on his legacy and the way forward for the Vatican is one of our favorite Vatican watchers. He also happens to be the managing editor of our sister site, hotair.com, in the Salem family. He's Ed Morrissey. Ed, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, although it was a little sadder knowing that we had lost this great man. I called him a giant. I don't think I'm understating the case. This was a great theological mind that graced our presence for the last 60 years.
You know, I think it's absolutely correct, Larry. And I think part of the reason why people may not appreciate that is because Pope Benedict XVI, or Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, was a little bit of an introvert, right? I mean, you compare him between the outsized personality of St. John Paul II and Pope Francis, who's very clearly a pastorally oriented pope. And Benedict tends to get a little lost in that. Also, Benedict, I think, was really caught up in trying to fix the abuse scandals that erupted during his time as prefect for the Congregation of the Defense of Faith and during, John Paul II's papacy, and took some strides forward in that. But I don't think that anybody really gave him his due in terms of being a pope. Although I think that people did understand that as a theologian, he was really par excellence.
Well, Ed, is that possibly because, honestly, some of his greatest achievements, some of his greatest writing and thinking was when he was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger during the John Paul II pontificate versus the 9 years when he was Pope?
No, I think you're right about that, Larry. And I think, nobody doubts that John Paul II was a master theologian himself, right? He did a lot of his own writing. But as Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI undergirded a lot of the work that John Paul II did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was recognized in that time. It was recognized as such in that time. And so that, I think, is probably, I think people probably really have appreciated that part of his career all along. I think what's really going to be up for, reassessment, if you will, is the not quite 9 years he spent as Pope. And it's interesting, too, because he actually spent more time as Pope Emeritus than he did as Pope. Slightly longer in retirement than he was as Pope. And I think that it's that connecting bridge between John Paul II and Francis that is really going to be open for a lot more reassessment. And I think in a positive way in terms of what Benedict XVI's legacy is really going to be.
He had a good relationship with Saint Pope John Paul the Great. In fact, didn't he said the funeral mass for John Paul II at the Vatican, did he not?
I believe that's correct. And Pope Francis is going to be saying the funeral mass for Pope Benedict XVI too, which is unusual because normally you have the funeral before you have a conclave, right? You do the funeral first and you do a conclave. Yeah. In this particular case, first time in 600 years, you had a pope that just retired, and so there's already a regnant pope in place. But yes, I believe that's correct.
Ed,
they worked together a long time.
Ed, do we have any better insight into that decision that he made to retire? I mean, it was said at the time that he was feeling weak, he was in ill health, he didn't think that he could carry on, and yet, as you stated, he actually lasted longer, and it appears that he was still relatively engaged and cognizant right up until the end. Why did he make that decision, that extraordinary, well, not unprecedented, but pretty unprecedented decision? It's taken 6 centuries.
Well, I'll say that I don't think that we got any more insight into that. I think that both Benedict and Francis let that decision speak for itself over the years. I know that there's been plenty of speculation as to why Benedict decided to retire. There was a suggestion that he didn't feel he was up to he didn't have the energy for the type of reform that was necessary for the Curia at the time, and he was hoping to get somebody younger and stronger in place of him to get that done. But I think, as it turns out, he obviously lived another decade.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what it was that called him to do that, except for, as you and I as Catholics can say, well, the Holy Spirit may have called him to do this for some reason that is going to remain a mystery to us, perhaps for decades. And maybe it's going to take a long time for that to unfold.
You know what I was struck by when I was reflecting on Pope Benedict, Ed, was how many outspoken, intellectual, influential Catholics that you hear today, especially in the new media, many of whom converted from Protestant Christianity, how many of them point to Joseph Ratzinger or Benedict XVI as sort of the inspiration. Scott Hahn, to begin with, an incredibly influential Protestant convert, he says, it was reading Joseph Ratzinger that opened me up to the Catholic Church. There are many more, but he really, I mean, I don't think it can be understated what influence he had on all of Christianity.
No, I think that the two of them together put together the most effective, I don't even want to say defense. I'll say, you can call it apologia, if you will, but they put together the best forward argument for Catholicism as a relevant force in modern history that had been made in perhaps centuries. And part of this is they were two of the driving intellectual forces behind Vatican II, which was all about re-engagement with the world, opening the windows, as
Right.
John the 23rd.
And the new evangelism, which John Paul II quoted, yeah. And the two of them worked together, certainly, in that new evangelism as the church grew, despite incredible challenges, including the scandal that you alluded to. The church has grown since then. Maybe not here in America, but certainly worldwide.
Actually, I think I read something the other day that there was 2 million more Catholics over the last decade here in the United States. That could be because of immigration. That could be because of conversions. We certainly hope it's conversions. But the numbers of Catholics are growing here in the United States as well. Tremendous growth in Africa. That's the really dynamic growth point for the church. And I think that the church I think you're going to see a lot of strength coming out of Africa in future conclaves as a result.
Well, there was some speculation. I remember when you were at the Vatican during the last conclave that ended up with Pope Francis as the pontiff, there was a lot of speculation that the next pope could be coming out of Africa. It ended up being South America instead. Ed, let's talk about the future, because I was struck by a video I saw today of Pope Francis. He was in a wheelchair. He's had some health problems over the last year or so as well. The average, John Paul II was an outlier with 24 years, right? I mean, I don't wish any well, and no one misinterpret me. I'm just looking at the facts here. We're going to have a new pope probably somewhat soon. Does this current College of Cardinals, does it have the imprint of John Paul II and Benedict, or does it have the imprint of Francis?
Well, I think after 8 years or so, right? It's almost 9 years. Well, excuse me, almost 10 years. Almost 10 years. Yeah, there's certainly been a number of cardinals appointed by Francis. So I would say that, the College of Cardinals is going to have Francis's imprint here. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a carbon copy of Francis. I think that it just depends on how the next conclave views the needs of the Catholic Church. Do they need to continue along the more pastoral lines in which, Pope Francis has likened the church to a field hospital for sinners and needs to be oriented in that way, or do they need another theologian at the top, similar to what they've had in the previous two pontificates? And it's difficult. I mean, I could tell you from sitting there and having this absolutely hilarious conversation on the radio in Perspective, talking about how trying to predict what happened in that conclave.
Yeah.
You just can't predict it. It's unpredictable.
There is no predict. Although I think Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger was a little predictable. I sort of felt that way. It's going to be Ratzinger. He's going to follow JP2. But these are interesting times for sure. And we did lose a great man. Thankfully, though, over 60 books I think Benedict XVI authored in his lifetime. He will be with us for centuries. The mark that he's left on this church. Ed Morrissey, great stuff as always, and great work at Hot Air as always. Thank you for joining us. There's more to come. Keep it here on O'Connor Tonight.